Hello my geniuses, welcome to another embryological lecture series. Today it's your great science tutor Lorenzo, and we'll be discussing the embryology of the bladder and the urethra. So if you are new to my channel, hey, don't forget to subscribe and turn on your post notification button, so anytime I drop any video you'll be sure to be notified. And if you want me to make a video for you, write it down in the comment section. If you do not understand, write it down in the comment section, and I promise you to make the video again for you to understand. And if you want me to make any video, also write it down in the comment section. So let us jump right into the video. So now, in the formation of the bladder and the urethra, always remember I told you in the hint gut video that the cloaca has an anterior and a posterior region. An anterior and posterior region. The allantois migrate anteriorly to form the urogenital sinus, while the hint gut, the terminal part of the hint gut, migrate posteriorly to form the anorectal canal, which forms the anal canal, while the front form the urogenital sinus. So you have urogenital sinus in front of the cloaca and the anal canal at the back of the cloaca. The center is separated by what we call the urorectal septum. The urorectal septum. So now this urorectal septum, I said, forms the perineal body. Urorectal septum forms the perineal body, and it is mesodermal. While in front is the urogenital sinus, while at the back forms the anal canal. I also told you in hint gut video that the anal canal does what? Has a superior part and an inferior part. The superior part is endodermal, while the inferior part is ectodermal, formed by the protoderm. But in this video now, in the bladder, we are concentrating on the urogenital sinus. The urogenital sinus has three portions: the largest upper part, the middle part, and the lower part. The upper part forms the bladder. The largest upper part forms the what? The bladder. And always remember, the bladder is continuous with the allantois. The bladder is continuous with the allantois, because the allantois that migrates into the anterior part of the cloaca to form the urogenital sinus. The urogenital sinus has three portions. It has the anterior, the upper part, the upper or extreme part, which is the largest part. You have a middle part and you have a lower part. The upper part from the bladder, and the bladder is continuous with the allantois, with the lumen of the allantois rather. And that lumen of the allantois, at first it is open, and it is open continuously, but with time it becomes obliterated. The lumen becomes obliterated, which is the connection within the bladder and the allantois becomes obliterated and forms the uracus. Now the connection between the bladder and the allantois, the lumen itself, is continuous at first, but with time it becomes obliterated to form the uracus. While in adults it becomes fibrotic. Why it becomes fibrotic? Due to the closure of the placenta. So when there is closure of the placenta after the baby has been given birth to, what happens? It becomes fibrotic and form the medial umbilical ligament. While the perineal body that was formed from the urorectal septum, it marks the point of attachment to all perineal muscles. Don't forget. Now we have talked about the upper part. The upper part is where the bladder is from. The upper larger part of the urogenital sinus forms the bladder. Now the middle part is called the pelvic part of the urogenital sinus, which forms the prostatic and the membranous part of the urethra. So the middle part, which is the pelvic part, forms the prostatic and the membranous part of the urethra, while the upper part forms the bladder that is continuous with the allantois but degenerate and become obliterated to form the uracus in utero. And the uracus, when the child is not outside the womb, what happens? It becomes fibrotic and form the medial umbilical ligament. Now the last side is the last part, which is the smallest part, is the phytic part. The phytic part of the urogenital sinus. Now the phytic part of the urogenital sinus has different development. It has different development for male and female, but at first it is flattened from side to side. The phytic part is flattened from side to side, but its development is different, because as the growth of the genital tubercle continues to occur, continue to proliferate, what happens? The phytic part is pulled ventrally. As it is pulled ventrally, it develops differently in male and female. So the upper part forms the bladder. The middle pelvic part forms the prostatic and membranous urethra, while the lower phytic part has different development in male and female. In male and female, they have different development, but one thing you have to know that as the genital tubercle continues to grow, they pull the phytic part of the urethra ventrally. So and you should know that they are flattened from side to side. So since they are flattened from side to side, as the genital tubercle begins to grow, they are pulling the phytic part to the front. So always know that the formation of the last part of the urogenital sinus, which is the phytic part, has different origin for male and female, while the middle part In male, from the prostatic and the membranous ureter, while the upper part forms the what? Bladder. Now, one thing you have to know now, during the cloaca differentiation, as the cloaca begins to differentiate into various structure, what happens? Now, the cordial part of the what? Mesonephric duct now is absorbed into the bladder. When it's absorbed into the bladder, together with the urethric bud, which is an outgrowth of the what? The mesonephric duct that form the ureter, both of them are incorporated, and when they are incorporated into the bladder, they form the trigone. So most of them are mesodermal in origin. They are mesoderm in origin, but during continuous proliferation, they are now obliterated by what? Endodermal cells. So they are now lined more by endoderm and less by what? Mesoderm. Don't forget. So one thing you have to know now, that the urethric bud forms the ureter. The urethric bud forms the ureter, and the ureter at first enters into the bladder. The ureter at first enters into the bladder cordially. The ureter enters into the bladder cordially, but during the ascension of the what? Of the kidney, during the ascension of the kidney, the orifices of the ureter move cranially. The orifices of the ureter move what? Cranially, while those of the structures from the mesonephric duct comes closer. The structures from the mesonephric ducts come closer and enter into the prostatic ureter to form the ejaculatory duct. Don't forget. So we are forming two things now. At first, the ureter entered the bladder cordially, but during what? Ascension of the kidney, the ureter orifices are moved to the cranial part of the bladder, while other part of the metanephric duct comes closer and open up in the prostatic ureter. When they open up in the prostatic ureter, they form the what? Ejaculatory duct. Now the ureter is endodermal in origin. Before, the bladder and the ureter, before, what happened to them? They are mesodermal in origin because of the incorporation of the mesonephric duct and the ureter. Now they becomes, when endodermal cell obliterate them and enter them, what happened? They are now lined by endoderm. Why the connective tissues and muscles around these structures, which is the bladder and the ureter, are formed by the what? Visceral mesoderm. So outside is formed by the visceral mesoderm, which is the connective tissue, and the muscles are formed on the visceral endoderm, while the epithelium itself inside, which is mesodermal in origin before, becomes what? Endodermal. So by the end of the 3rd month, the epithelium, the endodermal epithelium inside the prostatic urethra begins to proliferate. It begins to proliferate. Cells begins to surround them. They begin to form a lot of cells by mitosis. So when they begin to form a lot of cells by mitosis, what happens? They now begin to form so many outgrowths. So as they continue forming so many outgrowths, they now start penetrating the surrounding mesenchyme. They start proliferating and entering the surrounding mesenchyme to form, in male, prostate gland, in female, the paraurethral gland of scale, which is cranially. In male, all this epithelial proliferation from the surface ectoderm of the prostatic urethra forms an outgrowth and penetrating into the surrounding mesenchyme. In male, forming the prostate gland, while in female, forming the paraurethral gland of what? Scale. Don't forget. So we have talked about the beginning of the bladder. We have talked about the beginning of the ureter. The bladder, again, in recap, the bladder is formed from the upper largest part of the urogenital sinus, while the ureter, the prostatic and membranous ureter, is formed from where? The middle part, the pelvic part of the urogenital sinus. While the phytic part, what did I say? It is fighting from side to side. And its development is different from male and female. As the genital tubercle begins to grow, what happens? It is pulling the phytic part ventrally. Don't forget. Now the ureter at first is attached to the bladder. It opens in the bladder cordially, but during the ascension of the kidney, what happens? The ureter enters the bladder cranially, while the other part of the mesonephric duct, what happens? Comes together and enter into the prostatic part of the ureter to form the ejaculatory duct. So formally now, the endodermal lining of the bladder and the ureter is what? Mesoderm, due to the incorporation of the ureter and the mesonephric duct to form the trigone. So the lining is what? Mesodermal in origin, but with time, due to flooding and obliteration of endodermal cell, it becomes what? Endodermal. Simple. It is not hard. While the urorectal septum forms the what? The perineal body, which marks the point of attachment for all perineal muscles. Done. Now, some congenital abnormality, the congenital abnormality that occurs in the bladder or in the ureter, is very also simple. The first one we're talking about is the urachal fistula. So the urachal fistula is caused when the lumen that is connecting the bladder, the superior part of the bladder, with the allantois do not obliterate. If it doesn't obliterate, the lumen will be open and there will be removal of urine, or there will be excretion of urine from the bladder through the umbilicus. But if a local area around the allantois persists, if the local area around the allantois persists, because in the first fistula, which is the urachal fistula, all the lumen around the allantois persists. That is why urine can come from the bladder through the umbilicus. But if there's only a small area that persists, there will be a secretory activity which causes cystic dilation to form the urachal cyst. So if there's only a small area in the allantois, if it persists, it will form what we call a urachal cyst. But if the whole area persists, it will call it a urachal fistula. The next one, if the upper part close to the umbilicus, if the upper part of the allantois persists, to form a urachal sinus. So there are three: urachal fistula when the whole lumen persists. The next one is urachal cyst. The cyst is when the local area persists. And the last one, if the upper part of the urachus, is the upper part of the urachus, which is the remnant of the allantois, persists, it will form what we call a urachal sinus, which sometimes is continuous with the bladder. So you have the urachal fistula, you have the urachal cyst, and you have the urachal sinus. The next one is the exstrophy of the bladder. The exstrophy of the bladder. The exstrophy of the bladder is a ventral body wall defect. It's a ventral body wall defect when the bladder, the mucous membrane of the bladder, is exposed. When the mucous membrane of the bladder is exposed, it is called an exstrophy of the bladder. And it's usually caused when the lateral body wall fold. When the lateral body wall fold doesn't fuse with the midline of the pelvic cavity. And it is caused when the lateral body wall fold doesn't fuse with the midline of the cavity. It will cause an exstrophy. It is very rare and it occurs in about 2 or 10,000 births, like in fetus that they give birth to. Always in ratio 2 to ratio 10,000 births every come. Now what happens? Epispidesis occurs, whereby there will be opening of the dorsal part of the penis down to the bladder and down to the urachus. So epispidesis occurs. What is epispidesis? When there is an opening on the ventral part of the penis down to the bladder and down to the umbilicus. Epispidesis is a constant feature of exstrophy of the bladder. Again, exstrophy of the bladder is the ventral body wall defect which exposes the mucous membrane of the bladder. And epispidesis is a common features of exstrophy, whereby there will be an opening in the dorsal body wall of the penis down to the bladder and to the opening of the umbilicus. And the main causes of it is when the lateral body wall fold doesn't fuse with the midline of the wall of the pelvic cavity. It is very rare and it occurs in ratio of 2 to 10,000 births. The next is exstrophy of the cloaca. Exstrophy of the cloaca, just like the exstrophy of the bladder, but this one is more severe because it's a ventral body wall defect. It's a ventral body wall defect whereby the ventral body wall fold doesn't fuse with the midline of the pelvic cavity greatly. So it doesn't fuse greatly, and this one is more severe because what happened? Now, this is due to the fact that it doesn't fuse. What happened? The genital swelling will be spaced very well. The genital swelling will be spaced, which will cause defect of the external genitalia. So if the genital swelling is spaced very greatly, what happens? The genitalia will not be formed very well. It will cause what we call abnormality. The next one, the urorectal septum. The urorectal septum will not also be formed, and there will be persistence of the cloacal membrane, which cause imperforate anus. Don't forget. Now, this one is greatly and it is very bad. It is very bad because if to this greater extent in the exstrophy of the bladder there can still be fusing, but in this one there is no fusing, and if it doesn't continue to fuse or nothing is done to it, what happens? It will affect it greatly, that it will cause abnormality in the external genitalia, the separation of the genital swelling, the urorectal septum will not form, and the cloacal membrane will not be degenerated, causing imperforate anus. So hope you get it. So we have talked about the urachal fistula, urachal sinus, urachal cyst, exstrophy of the bladder, and the cloaca. So I hope it all made sense to you and you understood the development of the bladder and the ureter, the epithelium, how they are formed, the ureter entering the bladder at from cordially to cranially and everything. The epithelium of the bladder changing from mesoderm to what? Endoderm. We discussed everything. I hope it all made sense to you, and I hope you understand. So if you are just new to my channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on your post notification button. If the video is too fast, just you can use the YouTube auto subtitle, or you slow down the video, or you also use your Langman Embryology or any of your Embryology textbook to also study it. It's very easy, just like a story. It's very simple, so use it to understand it very, very well. And if you want me to make a video for you, drop it down in the comment section. I promise I'll make the video for you. So you can start from reading the hindgut, which from the cloaca part down to the bladder formation. So next we'll be going into its development of the kidney. Stay with me throughout the course of the video. In the next video and subsequent other video, watch all the videos. You will understand it very well. Bye bye.